trust me, I get it. You're feeling the pressure to keep your faith separate from your work, worried that pursuing your God-given dreams might be seen as selfish or misguided. Here's what I've discovered. Our faith isn't a liability in our leadership. As a matter of fact, it's the source of our strength and wisdom. The real challenge is navigating how to boldly pursue our purpose while staying anchored in our faith. And that's exactly what the Beacon Show is all about. Each week, we bring you biblical wisdom and practical strategies from true beacons, Christian leaders who are illuminating the world. And it's also that you can let your light shine brighter and brighter. I'm Tamara Jackson, and this is The Beacon Show.
In a world where faith and finance are often at odds, Tim Dockery stands as a bridge from the sacred to the practical. With a career spanning decades and a fundraising tally exceeding, get this, $500 million, Tim isn't just an ordinary fundraiser. He's a modern day alchemist turning goodwill into tangible change. From the hallowed halls of Princeton to the bustling corridors of the Catholic diocese, Tim's journey is a testament to the power of purpose-driven finance. The numbers don't tell even half of the story. For Tim, every dollar raised is more than a figure on a balance sheet. It's a step towards realizing God's vision on earth. Today, we dive into the mind of a man who sees fundraising not as a necessary evil, but as a spiritual calling. A man who believes that the act of giving is just as transformative for the giver as it is for the recipient. A man who has stood toe-to-toe with some of the most influential figures in the Catholic Church, challenging long-held beliefs about the intersection of wealth and faith. From eradicating polio to building schools, from supporting orphanages to fundraising major diocesan initiatives, Tim's work has touched countless lives. But perhaps his biggest achievement is the way he's reframed the very concept of stewardship, turning it from a duty into a joyful act of faith. So I want you to join me as we explore the delicate dance of inspiring generosity without manipulation to the power of storytelling in opening hearts and wallets, and the deep spiritual lessons hidden in the act of giving. Whether you're a person of faith, a nonprofit leader, or simply someone that's curious about the mechanics of large-scale philanthropy, Tim's insights promise to challenge, inspire, and perhaps even change your perspective on what it means to truly be generous. This is my friend Tim Dockery's story, a tale of faith, finance, and the extraordinary impact that occurs when the two are brought into harmony. Enjoy. Tim, welcome to the Beacon Show, where wisdom meets faith and success finds its voice. We've been having a great time so far, and I just know that this conversation is going to be a blessing to the audience. Thank you for being here with us today.
Tam, thank you very much for the invitation. It was an honor to be asked to be part of your show, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah. Well, listen, I have been looking forward to this because you are one of maybe a few people that get me, because I have an appreciation for money and what it can do. And I'm also a strong person of faith. And I know that you have served at this intersection of faith and money for such a long time. So I know that what we talk about today is going to help some powerful mindset shifts. I'm just going to declare that in advance. It's going to help some powerful mindset shifts to happen. But it's always really interesting for me and our audience, Tim, to get to know the person behind the mission. So let's start at the beginning for you. Talk to me about young Tim. How did Tim grow up?
My mom and dad went to grade school together in St. Louis, and they to say that they were not friendly would be an understatement. My mom was from a fairly well-to-do Italian family. My grandfather owned a plating company, and they were very proper. My dad was a dirt poor Irish kid from the wrong part of town, part of St. Louis called Dog Patch. My mom grew up on the hill, and there was this Irish section of the hill called Dog Patch, and that's where my dad grew up. And My dad went into the Christian Brothers Seminary at age 16 and kind of disappeared. Nobody else kind of knew where he was because back in those days, the seminarians weren't allowed to go home. They weren't allowed to have contact with their families. And my dad discerned at age 21 that he was not being called to be a Christian brother. And through a series of very random events, he ended up going to work for a small consulting firm that ran fundraising campaigns for Catholic churches, a company called Community Counseling Service, or CCS. And as his career took off, my dad got larger and larger responsibilities, and he was supervising a territory, which meant he was constantly on airplanes. And most of your listeners are probably too young to remember that you used to have to call the airlines directly to make a reservation and to book a flight, or you had to work through a travel agency. So my dad was calling Trans World Airlines (TWA) to make a flight, and he was giving his information, and the person on the other end said, "Are you the Vernon Dockery who grew up on Tam Avenue in St. Louis?" My dad said, "Well, yeah." And my mom said, "Well, this is Margaret Barrow. We went to grade school together." And so my dad, in the conversation, found out that my mom was living in Chicago. And he said, "Hey, I'm going to be in Chicago in 2 weeks. Would you like to go out to dinner?" And as my mom always likes to joke, at the end of the dinner, when my dad walked her back to the apartment, he didn't know whether to proposition or propose, but he chose wisely. So they had a whirlwind romance, and they got married on October 10th of 1964, and I was born on July 13th of 1965. So you can do the math on that.
Wow.
um, and at the time they got married, my father was running campaigns for CCS. And so I was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, when my dad was running a campaign for the Marywood Sisters. Fast forward 18 months, my brother came along when we were in Pueblo, Colorado, where dad was running the campaign for the Catholic Diocese of Pueblo. And then we moved to Honolulu, where dad ran the campaign for the Diocese of Hawaii, all the states of Hawaii. And then dad was assigned to the campaign for the Diocese of Anchorage, Alaska. And mom said, "Have fun."
I'm not going with you on this
I'm
one.
not going to Alaska. So my dad commuted from Honolulu to Anchorage, which sounds crazy, but if you go look at the map, Alaska goes so far out into the Pacific that it was only about a 2.5 hour flight, and they had direct flight, so it was rough, it was brutal. And then my dad's next assignment was the campaign for the Catholic Center at the University of California, Berkeley, and this is in 1969. And my dad had never been to San Francisco, and he had a buddy from high school who had spent some time in the military. And he called his buddy Stu, and he said, "Stu, I'm moving the family to San Francisco. I have no idea, where should I look for an apartment?" And Stu, who had lived in San Francisco in 1961, said, "Vern, I had a wonderful, very affordable apartment in a cute little neighborhood near the Golden Gate Park. It's called the Haight-Ashbury. You should rent a place there." So my dad, sight unseen, rented an apartment in Haight-Ashbury in 1969 and dropped us down into the middle of the insanity that was the late 60s, early 70s in that part of the world. Um, After that pro campaign, my dad decided to get out of the consulting world. The travel was getting pretty rough, and we ended up in the Chicago area. He ended up with a Catholic hospital on the north side of Chicago, run by the Sisters of St. Francis healthcare system, and he spent most of his career there. And that's where he got very involved with what was then known as the National Society of Fundraising Executives. It's now known as the Association of Fundraising Professionals, or AFP. But my dad was very involved in helping to codify the profession and to put all this knowledge together and turn fundraising into a profession in which people study and learn and have certifications that can mark to potential employers, "Hey, I know this business. I understand the fundamentals. I understand the ethics." So that's how I grew up. People say, "Where'd you go to grade school?" And I said, "Well, I went to seven. Went to seven different grade schools." So
Wow, I can't even imagine moving around all those times. How did it impact you? Like, I would imagine that there are some positive. I mean, we could instantly think, "Well, gosh, that was hard to move around a lot." But do you remember anything that you actually learned or how it maybe benefited you to experience that as a child?
I learned how to make friends. I learned how to understand the social dynamics of a room and try and understand it. But I also I retreated into the world of books a lot of times when I didn't have a lot of friends. I loved to read. My mom was an avid reader. My mom, until she passed, gave me a book for every major holiday. So I have a collection of, my birthday gifts and Christmas gifts and Easter gifts were always books from my mom, and it became fun for me to shop and buy books for her too. Um, but I used playing sports as my hook to get in and get to know people, and that's something I did uh, well into my 30s when I was working for CCS as a director.
Wow. You know what? It's funny when you said that. I thought, wow, it sounds like a simple thing, but I'm thinking about conversations that I've had with friends, with business associates. Making friends as you get older, especially, can sometimes be for some people kind of difficult, right? Because you get into your rhythm of your job or your business or whatever, you have your family, this and that, but you may not prioritize making friends as much as maybe we did when we were younger. So that's truly a skill that you were able to develop, and I can only imagine how it translated for you professionally, just knowing how to read a room, things of that nature. So I'm curious though, Tim, did you always know that you were going to go into fundraising following in your father's footsteps, or did you have dreams to do something different?
You know, um, I had no sense that I was going to become a fundraiser. Going in high school and college, I thought for a while about going to law school, but I had some fairly significant loans that I'd taken out to put myself through my undergraduate years, and I just was a little intimidated about the idea of borrowing more money with that kind of debt. So I had been offered a position with Procter and Gamble my senior year in college. It was a really really good position, associate brand manager in their consumer goods division. There was a promise after 3 years that they would pay for me to get an MBA. And it was a really, really lucrative opportunity with a phenomenal company, one of the top companies in the world in the world of marketing. Um, but my dad kept encouraging me that I should go talk to the president of CCS. And at the time, CSS headquarters were in the Empire State Building in New York. And purely as a courtesy to my father, I called the president's secretary, introduced myself, and told him who my father was, and he agreed to meet with me for an hour. So I took the train. I went to college in New Jersey, so I took the train in to New York, and I always remember this. I hadn't had a haircut in like 5 months, so before I had the interview, I got my haircut, not realizing that I was very, very suntanned. So I had about a 1 inch high white strip all the way around my head going into this interview. So it looked like a moron to this guy. Um, and in the course of the interview, Bill Hanrahan was this gentleman's name. Bill shared with me that the firm, CCS, had been retained by Rotary International to do a campaign to raise enough money to immunize every child in the world against polio. And I said, well, Bill, it's 1987. Didn't we eradicate polio in the 60s? And he said, well, Tim, we did in the Western world. In the US and Europe, we've eradicated polio. But in South America, in Asia, and in Africa, polio is the number one killer of children. He said it's the equivalent of two 747s fully loaded with children crashing every single day. And he said half the children who contract polio die from polio, and the other half of the children who contract polio die because their families can't take care of crippled children, so they abandon them in the forest to the wild animals. And he said, we're going to change that. We're going to raise enough money that is eradicated, and no child anywhere in the world will ever again have to grow up in fear of contracting polio. No family will ever have to worry what they would do if their child caught polio. So now I'm on the train going back to campus, and I'm going, I was educated by the Carmelite monks and fathers in a Catholic high school, and one of the things that they taught us was that every one of us has been given a set of gifts by God, and that they're unique. No one else in the world got the gifts that God gave you, and God gave you those gifts for a purpose. And your most important objective in your life is to discern what the purpose that God gave you your gifts is. So I'm on this train and I'm riding back to campus, and I'm going, make a lot of money selling potato chips, make a little bit less money helping eradicate polio in the world. So After a long conversation with my dad, some time on my knees in prayer in the chapel, I made the decision to go to work for CCS. Um, and I never once spent a day on the Polio Plus campaign at CCS. Like, my first month on the job, I was assigned to run a campaign for Christ the King Catholic Church in Toledo, Ohio, where the case statement to raise the money for was to blacktop the parking lots, to remove the asbestos from the boiler room, and to replace the toilets in the men's and women's restrooms, restoring God's
Wow.
house. So,
If
so
that
I won't
wasn't
say
a
I
bait
got.
and switch.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say bait and switch, but the good news is that the Polio Plus campaign was a smashing success. The Rotary clubs around the world raised a fortune, and about 10 years ago, I saw in the newspaper that for the first time in recorded history, there wasn't a single case of polio in India, and it's been all but eradicated, except in a couple of countries where violence, civil war and violence, or just crazy religious repression has prevented the citizens from benefiting from those vaccines. But it's estimated there's probably 50 million children alive today who would have died from polio, but for the vaccine programs. So huge hats off to all the men and women in Rotary International who took on such a ambitious endeavor, and it inspired their friends and fellow citizens in the Lions clubs to organize their own campaign. If you know, the Lions have always been about collecting eyeglasses and distributing eyeglasses to families who can't afford that, and so the Lions decided to attack a disease that's caused by a parasitic worm that gets into the eyeballs and causes people to go blind. It's only it only exists in countries that have very poor water sanitation, and it's a very so it's only the poorest of the poor in the world get this disease. So there's zero profit incentive for the big drug manufacturers to widely manufacture and distribute the vaccine, which only takes a single dose to render a person not susceptible to this. And so, through the work of the Lions clubs and the guidance and direction of CCS, another major deadly disease in the world was eradicated, and it was really powerful to see what we can accomplish when we come together as a society. I mean, these were Rotary clubs in 114 countries, Lions clubs in 87 countries, and people all around the world came together to improve the lives of people they will never meet, they'll never see, they'll never get a chance to that. And it's just so inspiring to me what we're able to do when we find a good cause and we get behind it and we support it.
Yeah, it is. It's mind-blowing. And what you've also highlighted for us that are in the States is just because our experience is one thing doesn't mean that everyone around the world is experiencing the same thing. So it's also a comment upon us, I believe, as believers, to be compassionate and caring about others that may not be in the place that we are at. And that's the vital gap that fundraising helps to eliminate, right? Is those that have the means to financially support alleviating suffering for someone else, they're able to donate of their surplus, and sometimes it's different for every person what that surplus is, and sometimes people are making a sacrifice to make it happen, but they're doing it, just as you shared, Tim, because they were inspired, just like that story that you were told about polio, and it inspired you to walk away from a lucrative job opportunity, but it sounds like you couldn't get it out of your head. Like it touched you somewhere in your heart where you're like, this is part of why I'm here. And you just weren't willing to walk away from that opportunity.
Well, there's a poem that's often referred to in Catholic world. It's called "The Hound of Heaven," and it's very common for priests to read that poem because it's about God pursuing vocation, God pursuing a man with vocation. That he's like the hound of heaven; he never lets him out of his sights. And I have had in my career 3 or 4 opportunities to pursue something very lucrative outside of the world of the church, and every time I've pondered that, God has put an opportunity in my life that was perfect for me and that was part of the church. And so I really do feel like God is um, insisted on keeping me working working for him. And once I made the decision in my 40s to simply surrender my heart completely to the will of God and to try and discern that, that's been, it's not a question. Then it just becomes how does God need me, and what does He need me to do at this time?
Yeah. So I'm curious. Then you talked about this pivotal moment in your 40s at a later stage in life where there was this huge transition. I often find that we learn a lot from people's transition. So walk us through what happened and just how that changed you.
I talk about the Hound of Heaven a little bit. So when I grew up in a family that was very church oriented, church going, the church was the center of our faith. Went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. There was no question on Sunday morning we were going to church. And I went to a Catholic high school that served a fairly large area north of Chicago. The whole county, we were the only Catholic high school in the whole county. So I had buddies who lived 25, 30 miles away from where I did. We went to the same school. And my house was pretty close to the high school, and my parents were pretty fun parents. And so my house became a place that the guys would hang out. Saturday night. I think we had the first VCR that anybody had ever seen. I think the serial number on it was number one. And back in the day when you paid a membership fee to belong to a video rental store. So Saturday night was pizza night and movie night at the Dockery house, and my buddies would all spend the night. But the deal was, if you woke up on Sunday morning in the Dockery household, you were going to mass. There was just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so I got off to college, and on my own, I just stopped going to mass. And I don't know. It wasn't any act of rejection of God or anything. I was lazy. I was sleeping in late because I'd been out really late on Saturday nights. I was playing football in college, which is kind of like having a second job. So I had all kinds of excuses, but that's all they were, was just excuses. And in the spring of my freshman year, the guy who lived across the hall from me, who I barely knew, um, knocked on my door one day and he said, "Hey, you went to a Catholic high school, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And he goes, I never see you at mass. Would you like to go to mass with me tomorrow?" And I thought, okay. And so I went to mass with him. And as soon as I set foot in that church, I was like, this is what I've been missing. This is what I've been trying to fill with all the social life and all the working out and everything. It was this time with God, this time alone. So fast forward, I'm in my late 20s, and the same deal. I had kind of wandered away from practicing my faith. And the dude who lived across the hall from me in my apartment complex knocked on my door and said, "Hey, let's go to mass tomorrow." And so I feel like each time I've allowed myself to wander away, God, just like the good shepherd that He is, came and found me and brought me back to the flock. So in my early 40s, I was the head of fundraising for the Archdiocese of Chicago. I worked under Cardinal Francis George, who is a personal hero to me, and relate some stories about Cardinal George. And as I'm sure all your listeners are aware, in the early 2000s, the Boston Globe broke the story of the sexual abuse of children by a monster of a priest named Father John Gagan, and the stories just began to fall out of everywhere about priests who had done just absolutely horrific things to children. And I went through an absolute crisis of the soul. I'm here. I am trying to raise money for the Catholic Church and confronting this. And I told my wife, my job is explaining the unexplainable and defending the indefensible. And I was feeling really, really, really sorry for myself. And I was like, I got to get out of this. It's crushing my faith. It's crushing me. I don't enjoy the work. And I had an opportunity to go to Rome at that time, and we took a group of our major donors. It was during all the Catholic bishops in a territory of the United States have to go to Rome every 5 years and provide a series of reports to the Vatican on what's going on in their diocese. And it's called the ad limina visit. So Chicago was such a large diocese. We had the cardinal, and then we had 6 regions of the diocese that were known as vicariates, and each of those was headed by a bishop. Just to give you an idea of how big Chicago is and how Catholic it is, each one of those 6 administrative units on their own would have been one of the 10 largest dioceses in the United States. So that's how mega big that and how Catholic it was there. So we had about 200 donors, and we went over to Rome, and each day we had one of the bishops that was part of our retinue offer mass. And the first bishop who offered mass told us, if you're here on this trip to experience the beauty of the art and architecture and the majesty of Rome, you're on vocation. That's awesome. Have a wonderful, wonderful time, and you should enjoy it. We deserve vacations. But if you're here to prayerfully ask God to help you discern his will for your life, then you're on a pilgrimage. And if you're on a pilgrimage, you have some different things that you need to do to prepare yourself for that. So I just said, I'm going to commit myself to being on pilgrimage. And the next day, our group took a bus trip to a church called St. Paul's Outside the Walls. Now, St. Paul's Outside the Walls was originally a Roman temple and forum. It was a marketplace. So it predates Christianity. But when the Catholic Church took it over, one of the traditions is they painted a portrait of every single pope from St. Peter on the ceiling frescoes around the church. And there's short histories of each of the popes. And so I'm reading about men who were elected pope on a Wednesday and burned alive by the Romans on a Thursday. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't have the worst job ever in the history of the Catholic Church. God's not very subtle sometimes. And I just decided, and I steal this quote from one of our seminarians who was asked, how can you continue to be a seminarian for a church enmeshed in scandal? And he said, I like to think that if there's a burning building, I'm the one rushing in to help people, not the one running out. And so that's kind of what I've tried to do. And I've sensed through the writings of, I'm a huge fan of Bishop Robert Barron, who does a lot of Catholic stuff. He's got the Word on Fire Ministries. And Bishop Barron, in addressing the sex abuse scandal, first off, he said it's a horrible, horrible scandal. The devil has run an extremely effective playbook to destroy the church. But he said, if you go back 500 years or 1,000 years and you ask the faithful, what's wrong with the church? They would say, oh, there's sexual immorality among the priests, and the bishops are rich and they live like princes instead of like shepherds. And so he said, this has been the condition of the human church, the church on earth, the church that the devil throws everything he has against to weaken faith, to drive people away, because the church is the bulwark against the evil one in his operations in our planet. And man, if we can't withstand what the devil's going to throw at us, then we don't deserve to be part of church, because we're not alone. We have the entire armor of God. I have, the Bible, the sacraments, the teachings of the church, the angels, my fellow Catholics' prayers, everything to armor myself and gird myself for this fight. But it is working for the church, man. You see the sausage getting made sometimes.
Hmm. Wow. 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 You said so much. And even those that are viewing or listening that may not specifically be a member of the Catholic Church, we are seeing all across the board, right? It's showing
Anyone
up.
who believes in Jesus is an enemy of the devil.
Yes, we're seeing it show up everywhere. So so much wisdom in that, hey, yeah, recognizing what's behind it. This is the evil one trying to destroy the church, and not downplaying the evil or endorsing it or covering it up or any of those things. At the same time, not letting it deter us from the mission that we are called to carry forward and fulfill. And so I can't even imagine the different thoughts that were going through your mind, but it sounds like, once again, as you have shared so many times, Tim, that God just orchestrated these experiences to help you to get to a place where you could move forward. So you come back from, I'm curious, you come back from this trip to Rome. Is everything like just easy for you to mentally get back into it, or was there kind of a process that you had to work yourself through?
It was a process I had to work myself through. I had to come to a place where I could acknowledge that men who I looked up to and admired, men who wore the Roman collar, had done unspeakable things with children. Um, but as I went through that process, and as the Catholic Church went through that process, um, I came to understand that there's lot of people who harm children. There's a lot of people in our culture. We have a sickness in our culture of predation on children, and it is such a stain. I have a dear friend who, after multiple rounds of through rehabilitation for alcohol and drug abuse, uncovered memories of being molested by a family member as a child. And I always remember I was sitting on Christmas Day in Hazelden Rehab Center in Minnesota with him, and he looked at me and he said, "I wonder who I could have been." And that was just such a sad statement. I roomed with a couple of guys when I lived in Minnesota who were um, counselors for the juvenile sex offender program in Hennepin County, Minnesota. And one of the guys told me, not everybody who was molested as a child goes on to be a child molester, but everybody who's a child molester was molested as a child. And it's just a sickness, and we have to break it. We have to stop it, and we have to throw everything we can against it. I don't mean to get super bleak on you. I mean, that's not the you know, as you said earlier, it's the devil isn't trying to destroy the church because he hates the church. The devil's trying to destroy humankind because he hates humanity, because God made us in his image and his likeness. And the devil and the fallen ones are insane with hatred and jealousy over the love that God has given us. And so they want to destroy humanity. The church is just the first bulwark. The church is like, that's breaching the walls. And once they get through the walls, then they can run wild.
Yeah. And you know, as I hear you sharing that, Tim, for me, it says, well, then we need to do more. Like light is the only thing that can overcome darkness. So how do we put ourselves as believers in a position where we can shine more light? And that's why I think is complicated and as challenging as it may be at times in your journey, the work that you do is so important because the reality is if we are going to shine more light, if we are going to combat darkness, many of the things that we need to do have to be funded, which means we need money to actually make these things happen. As you were talking about the person that battled with addiction, there are organizations, there are things within the church and in other nonprofit areas where they are coming alongside people that are battling that, but we can't get them the help that they need without money. The funding has to be there.
I'm going to hold up a book. This is a spirituality of fundraising it's by a Catholic priest, Henri Nouwen, but it's written for a full audience. And Father Nouwen talks about his approach. He was part of a community that serves adults with developmental disabilities. They live in community, and they're part of their family, and they're I mean, so fundraising was a huge part of what he had to do. And he he said, if you go up to somebody and you say, times are hard and we're really struggling and we could use a few pennies if you can spare them, that's not an approach that's inspiring or encourages people. But if you come up and say, we're going to do something awesome, we have a project that is going to make the world a better place and it's going to be incredible, it's going to do this and this and this, would you like to be part of that? Would you like to come along with us? And again, those of us who grew up in Catholic grade school in the 60s and 70s, when the missionaries would come talk to us, they would say, some give by going, but all can go by giving. Not all of us can roll up our sleeves and sit down and counsel a person going through rehab or feed a hungry person, but through our philanthropy, we can empower and fund the great work that other people are doing. And Father Nouwen also talks about, you have to believe that God has abundantly blessed the world, that all the resources that we need to accomplish the tasks that God has set before us. He has given us those resources, but we allow so many other things in our culture to compete for those resources. And my spiritual director likes to talk a lot about what are the idols that I'm worshiping instead of my worship of God. And you know, I have skipped mass to go to a football game. And in confession, he said, "Well, there you are. You put the Minnesota Vikings ahead of God, Tim, and they're never going to win a Super Bowl because of it."
That's all your fault.
It's all my fault, entirely my fault. But if we look at, I used to give a talk, and I would say, uh, tithing to me is a very personal relationship, because only God and you know what your demands are. I mean, I know some very wealthy people who people think, why aren't they giving more to their church? Well, they happen to have a 15-year-old profoundly autistic child who will never live independently. And so they have to save and prepare for taking care of him for his entire life when they're no longer earning income. So that's a position that I don't know anything about. But I do know that uh, if we were to get to heaven, and I used to say, and God was to judge us by our checkbook, which dates me because nobody writes checks anymore. But if but if God were to look at your checking account bank statements and saw where you spent your money, and was to say, well, how much did you give to the poor? How much did you give to those suffering and struggling? How much did you give to those who I've called into ministry to serve you as your priests, as it's commanded to us in the Old Testament? Would you feel good about the answers that you would give God in that accounting and assessment of your lives? I One of the cornerstones of my faith the last several years has been a men's prayer group. And again, I was running a campaign for the Archdiocese of Detroit, living on the road away from my wife, and I would fly home 3 weeks out of the month, but I would stay in Michigan 1 week a month just so was on an airplane all the time. And I went out for a burger on a Saturday afternoon to watch some baseball at a little restaurant and sports bar. Couple sitting next to me, we strike up a conversation. They find out I'm not from Detroit. Ask me what I'm doing in town. And I said, I'm here working for the Archdiocese. And the guy says, oh, are you Catholic? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, I'm part of a church called Our Lady of Good Counsel, and we have a Wednesday morning men's prayer breakfast group. Would you be interested in being my guest next Wednesday? And I said, okay, sure. And then he said, we meet at 6 a.m.
Oh, he was
I
smart. He didn't tell
I
you
would
that
rather
first.
gnaw my arm off than get out of bed early. But I agreed to do it. That meant I had to get up at 4:45 in the morning to get dressed and showered, get dressed to go to work. So I walked into the basement of this church expecting a dozen guys to be there, and there were 200 men in groups of 8 in these tables, coming together for fellowship and prayer and a bagel. And sometimes there would be a speaker, but most of the times we just read a book collectively at our table, and then we'd pray for one another's intentions, and then we talk about the book. So when COVID hit, the campaign in Detroit got canceled, and they had to move everybody online for these meetings. So they asked me if I would or be a leader for an online group. Well, I was now down in Florida, and as we came out of COVID, there were several men who, for whatever reason, it just worked better for them to do online than in person. They were older or they'd moved. So I've been journeying for 5 years now with the same 8 guys in our Catholic faith. And the point of the story is that one of the books that we read is called "Be a Man," and I can't remember the last name, Father Larry something. It's a wonderful book, and each chapter is be a man for others, be a man who loves God, be a man who helps the poor, be a man who is a good husband. And it's a lot. It was a very challenging book because Father Larry pulls no punches when he comes to what our duties and responsibilities are. In fact, he talks about our obligation as husbands. He says, it says women get all hung up on the line, women be obedient to your husband. But he goes, but the next line is, men, love your wives as Jesus loved his church. He goes, what did Jesus have to do for the church, men? He had to die. So in that book, Father Larry asks a question. He says, okay, tithing. How much of your income belongs to the Lord? And everybody's like, oh, 10%. And he goes, no, It's 100%. He lets you keep 90% of it for what you see fit to do. And so he said, you know, give to your church, support your church, but above all, support, help the poor, give to the poor. Throughout the Bible, we're told we see the face of Jesus in the poor. Um, my hero, Cardinal George, used to say, we get to heaven on the backs of the poor. And you mentioned earlier this challenge about ministry. We used to do a second collection for the church in Central and South America when I lived in Chicago. We had, Chicago is the third largest Mexican city in the world after Mexico City and Los Angeles. And at one of our regional meetings, a man got up and he said to Cardinal George, "Why are we raising this money to give to Central and South America? We got poor people right here in Chicago." And Cardinal George said, "You're right. We do have poverty in Chicago. In the third world, they have misery." And that was just such a profound. Tam, I don't know if you've had an occasion to travel into countries that are, yeah, it is an eye-opening experience to encounter poverty at the level of a Haiti or a Guatemala. Those are the places I've been, and just you know, you thank your lucky stars every day that God allowed you to be born in America.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah. Um, and not to get all geeky on you, but when I was at the Archdiocese of Chicago, I used to tell my young directors when we were running these big diocesan fundraising campaigns, and as my dad used to joke, when he would get off the plane in a new city, it wasn't like there was a cheering throng of people going, "Thank God the fundraisers arrived."
I'm pretty sure there wasn't.
But I would tell my young directors that they're going to encounter the pastor's skepticism about the fundraising target they've been asked to reach. They're going to say, "Tim, this is crazy. My parish total offertory income is $1 million, and you expect me to raise another $1 million over 4 years or 5 years in this campaign? My people are struggling. They're hurting financially. They're just not capable of doing that." And I would tell my young directors, the prism in which we all view the world is influenced by what we hear and see. People come to their pastor when they're struggling. Um, the woman comes in and says, "My husband has announced he's leaving me for his secretary. What am I going to do? I don't have any money. I haven't been in work for 12 years. I've been raising our children." Or the man comes in and says, "Father, my company's going out of business. I'm losing my job for 22 years. I'm losing my health insurance. I don't know what I'm going to do to help my family." So nobody comes into the pastor and says, "Father, I just want to let you know, I crushed my sales number this quarter. I'm getting a $20,000 bonus." You know, or they don't come in and say, "Hey, Father, I just want to let you know that business my wife and I've been working on for 30 years. We just got approached by investors. They want to buy the company from us for $50 million." Those conversations don't often get to the pastor, but those things are happening. We know those things are happening in these industries as well. So when we were trying to put together a huge fundraising campaign for the Archdiocese of Chicago, we were going to be the first ever diocese to try and run a campaign to raise more than $200 million. And our pastors thought we were nuts. They thought this was crazy. So this is in 2000 that we were planning this. And that 2000 was the first year that the Census Bureau made available in downloadable form household income by zip code. So I partnered up with our IT guys and we put together a spreadsheet of how many families in each zip code each parish had and what the average income was from those families. And thus I could kind of calculate what the overall offertory income of all the families registered in a parish totaled to. And then unfortunately, as Catholics, we've struggled to get everybody to go to mass. So people are registered, but they don't participate in the church. So we just cut the number in half. We just said, all right, let's say half these people are actively engaged and participating and contributing in the church. Here's the number of that, what that income looks like, Father. And here's the percentage of that number that you're receiving in the offertory. And for most of our parishes, it was somewhere between 0.8% and 1.4% of the offertory income was coming to the parish. So I said, Father, at this number, basically let's call it one, we get about 1.1% on average of a family's income given to the church. And that collectively in this diocese adds up to $227 million a year. Imagine if we could get them from 1.1% to 2.2%. Now we have $458 million a year to run the church. And at that point, we could make Catholic education free for all families. We could fund seminarians out the wazoo. We could run vastly larger ministries, just getting people from 1.1% to 2.2%. And so that's where this my philosophy of abundance is out there. I think a lot of people want to be generous, and I'm by no means, especially after the inflation of the last 3 years, I'm well aware that there are many families who were getting by 4 years ago who are struggling. My wife and I, we my wife insists on shopping with Instacart online. Partly she doesn't like going to the grocery store, but partly it prevents me from impulse purchasing mustards and fancy fruits and jellies and things that I love. So it kind of helps keep a discipline on what we actually buy at the store. But we can go back and look at our sort of standard 2 week entree and look what we were paying 4 years ago and look what we're paying today. And it's a meaningful number. It's an impactful number. It's a number that if I was giving that much more to charity, I would feel really good about myself. So I want to be careful that I'm not implying that there aren't a lot of people struggling, but there are just things that we spend money on that you know, this is $200 a month. My parents didn't have one of those things. And the internet and the cable TV bills and the membership to a gym and things like that. So when people say that they don't have any money to give to charity, I don't know that that's an honest and thoughtful evaluation. But maybe it's because they haven't been inspired. They haven't received a message that inspires them. That they haven't received somebody saying, we're going to cure polio. Would you like to come along?"
Yeah. And when you said that though, it it just strikes a chord in you that I can be a part of something that seems almost impossible. And ultimately that is the type of work that you're doing is you're someone has a belief that says I can do this, and through the work that you do as a fundraiser, you're saying, no, 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 no. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Like we can actually do this, and here's what we need to make it happen. And so it's painting a picture of a bigger vision. And I love how you emphasize, Tim, hey, we serve a God of abundance. There is no lack. So the issue is more of how do we approach this, not how do we make something come out of thin air? It's there already. We just have to inspire people to take action because you're right. I've never walked into my pastor's office and said, "Hey, the business is great," or "I got a raise," or whatever. Yeah, I just want to give extra. Like, no, there is an element, and I'm so glad that you brought this out. It gets a bad name, marketing, fundraising, however you want to think about it, but it's true. There has to be some type of trigger for many of us to recognize, oh, I can do something to make a difference. And I'm going to choose to do that rather than this, because that's the other thing that you've highlighted here is even when I think I don't have it, I do. But what it means is I'm going to have to make a trade. I was spending it on this, and now I'm making a decision to spend it over here. And there's a shift that has to happen in the individual for them to want to do that, not to feel forced to do that.
I One of the life lessons that my dad taught me was that people don't give to the church because the church needs money. People give to the church because God has instilled in them a need to give back, the need to recognize that all they've received is gift, and that God asks us to do three things with the gifts He's given us: to receive them with gratitude, to use them wisely, the tale of the servants who are left the different amounts of money, and then to return them to the Lord with increase. And so that's the framework that I try to approach each of these challenges. Is yeah, what are the gifts God has given this organization, this industry? How does it use them wisely, and how does it return them to the Lord with increase? And everything is gift. I had a good buddy who had a daughter who had was profoundly autistic, nonverbal. She lived to be 19 years old, and they never heard a word from her. They never had any way of knowing whether was she happy, was she sad, was she did she recognize them, did she know that she was loved and taken care of. Anyone's told me, if I could get this right, health is a crown that a well man wears that only a sick man can see. So, if you have health, then you've already received one of the best gifts that anybody can get, anybody can ever get. And then if faith, then you should be inspired to see everything as gift from God and want to deploy it in service to God.
Hmm. Tim, I'm thinking about someone who's watching us and listening to us right now, and they're starting to get it. Some of the pieces are starting to fall into place, but maybe their big question is how. You've been doing this a long time. Can you give us a few tips? How does a leader that has a big mission that they're trying to accomplish, they're believing in that expanded vision, but maybe they're struggling with how to inspire people? Do you have just a few quick tips that you could give to educate the audience?
I think the most important thing that fundraisers need to understand is that people don't give to buildings, people don't give to projects, people don't give to causes, people give to people. People give to help improve people's lives, how to help somebody's life get better. And so when you're trying to describe the purpose of your organization, think about the lives that you're impacting, how you're improving something for someone in your community, and that's where the heart. Again, this is my dad. The initial decision to give is an emotional decision. It's a decision from the heart. How much to give is an intellectual decision, and you work that out. But the first victory has to be won in their heart. They have to. They have to say, "I want to come alongside this cause with my time and my money, and I want to help improve this part of the world that I've been given to till through this cause of this thing." So don't go out and say, uh, we need a church building that's 100 feet long and 80 feet wide that'll have a kitchen, so that we can have a gathering space so that activities can happen in the church. Say, no, we want our church to be something that is alive outside of the worship time. We want a church that is a place for community and gatherings in joy after weddings, gatherings in grief and sorrow after funerals, a place where our children can take religious education and grow and learn their love of Jesus Christ and his church. And that's what that and to do that we need to build a building. And the building's going to cost X, and we hope that you will prayerfully consider the best possible gift you can do in support of this cause.
Yeah. I love the way you said it, the best possible gift that you could do, because that's going to vary depending on the individual and where they are, what their best looks like. But just give us your best that you can spare to support this. I love that.
Yeah, there's the firm that I spent much of my career in is very, very strong on the concept of putting a dollar amount on the table for a family to react to and respond. And I've seen that be very efficacious, but I've also seen that particular crux of the request as the area where many leaders struggle the most and get the least confident. And so they throw in bailouts like, you know, I'm inviting you to prayerfully consider whether you could consider a commitment of $5,000 a year for 5 years for a total gift of $25,000, or whatever you can afford. If that's too much, whatever. And so I I like to give people a sort of guidepost. I like to create a table of the types of gifts that are necessary. As you said, um, you don't want to be asking the single mom who drives a school bus for the same dollar amount that you're asking the dual income couple where he's a lawyer and she's a surgeon. Jesus, again, has allocated talents and skills all across the board, equal sacrifice, not equal giving. That's why fundraising 101. If you've got 1,000 members in your parish and you need to raise $1 million, do not get up and say, we just need everybody to give us $1,000. Because that dual income family's like, here's the check, done. And that other woman's like, how am I going to come up with $1,000? I'm on food stamps and I have two children. And so we have to recognize, And to that end, when we were organizing that big campaign in Chicago, we were talking about identifying the families in each parish who are the lead supporters, who give the most, as sort of that's the first group of families that you go out and put this case to and invite them to support. And this very elderly Monsignor got up and he said, "Your Eminence," you're talking to Cardinal George, he says, "Your Eminence, I've been a priest for 55 years and I've never once looked at what anybody gives to the church because I don't want to minister any differently to somebody because I think they have more money." And he sat back down to a smattering of applause from the other priests. And Cardinal George paused and he looked up and he said, "Jesus knew the difference between the rich young man and the widow putting her penny in the collection plate. How can you minister to someone if you don't know where they're coming from?" He says, "Father, if there is a wealthy family in your parish who is giving very, very little to the church, they are in mortal jeopardy of going to hell, and you are their pastor and you're doing nothing to save their souls."
Whoa, mic
Yeah,
drop.
mind blown.
Wow,
So
that is such a huge point.
I once in a meeting, I had another priest talking about, we're just organizing all the offices under the bishop. And the one priest says, "Well, fundraising should go over here with building and grounds and finance because it's not part of the ministry of the church." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." Throughout scripture, Jesus constantly teaches the importance of giving. What did he tell the rich young man? He said, "Father, Rabbi, what must I do to get to heaven? Honor your mother and father, obey the Sabbath, love God." Did all those, give everything you have to the poor. And off the rich man went sad. And that's where you get it'll be easier for the camel to pass through the eye of the needle than the rich man to get into heaven. Now, I've subsequently in my Bible studies learned that the eye of the needle was the name for the opening in the wall of a walled city, and it was large enough for a man to walk through. But the camels that they used for pack mules couldn't go through standing up, so they trained them to get down on their knees and crawl through the opening. So Jesus wasn't saying it's impossible. Jesus was saying that wealth can be an obstacle to getting to heaven, and generosity is the solution. And so I very much view what I do as a ministry in the church, not a business function of the church.
Ooh, I love that. Oh, I love the way that you put that. It's such a huge mindset shift. It's a different way of thinking about the work that must happen to fund um being able to be a blessing to others. That is just as much ministry as the person that stands and delivers the sermon, or that serves around the church and in the nursery or these other areas. It's all ministry and they're all needed in order for us to make an impact. um I've got to respect your time, Tim. I know the time is
Yeah, I
flying
want to
by.
respect your time too. I know you got to edit this down into a listenable format. But if
I
I can just leave with one
Yeah,
final observation. So you
yeah.
may have noticed on my LinkedIn that I spent a couple of years at Ave Maria University in Florida. And for your listeners who may not be familiar, Ave Maria University was founded by Domino's Pizza founder Tom Monahan. And Tom Monahan sold Domino's Pizza in the mid '80s for what at the time was $1 billion, equivalent of almost $2.5, $3 billion today. Tom grew up in an orphanage, dirt poor, dropped out of college, went in the Marine Corps, dropped out of college because he couldn't afford it, and went to work at a pizza shop that he ended up buying from a guy, and built this into the behemoth that is Domino's today. And in the first several years after Tom sold Domino's, he built the most expensive house in Michigan. He had a private jet. He had a private three-masted sailing yacht. He bought the Detroit Tigers and won the World Series the next year. He had the largest private car collection in the world. He had one of the largest wine collections in the world. Collected all this art, and he wasn't very Catholic. I mean, he was Catholic and he was a faithful mass going Catholic, but he wasn't really on fire for Christ at the time. And he went to, I believe he went to Lourdes, Lourdes or Medjugorje, I can't remember. And he had a vision there in which Mary said, "I did not give you this money for foolish things." And it was a life-changing moment for Tom. And so he went back and he began to pray. And he said, I had the benefit of being the wealthiest, most well-known Catholic in the United States. So every Catholic fundraising entity in the world had approached me. So I could see what everything out there was to do. And I decided that the best way I could use this money was to establish an authentically faithful Catholic university, because I believe God gave me this wealth to help as many people as possible get to heaven and to bring with them as many people as they can. And I just thought that's such a beautiful way to look at your life. And I'm just trying to I'm trying to get myself to heaven by helping as many people get to heaven with me, and bringing along as many people as they can.
Wow. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And you are. I was looking at your LinkedIn page and I could see just cause after cause after cause that you've been able to be a part of. And I just am thankful that you were willing to spend some time with us today and share the wisdom that you've accumulated over the years, not just strategy and tactics, but the way that you've learned to think about the ministry of raising money. And so that's just hugely a blessing. Before I get you out of here, Tim, I want to ask if you had just one final, maybe an overarching piece of advice that you would give to those that are watching and listening to us right now. Maybe they have this huge goal that is in front of them. They need multiple millions of dollars in order to accomplish the vision that God has given them. Is there a piece of final advice that you would share with that leader today?
I would say that while with God all things are possible, let's not put God to the test too hard. You have to have a confidence and faith grounded in realism. Um, uh, Donors want to give to a project that has a likelihood of success, uh, and so um, uh, be bold, be optimistic, but work your numbers as well. If you need to raise X, where is X going to come from? I would do a lot of these what we call planning studies for these large capital campaigns, and I would say, well, the goal is $50 million. To raise $50 million, we're going to need to get a lead gift of $5 million. Are you aware of anyone in the community who could make a gift of $5 million? And they would say Oprah Winfrey or Michael Jordan. You'd be like, is Oprah a member of your congregation?
Right.
um,
Yeah, then there's that.
yeah. So you have to, um, but just have an elevator pitch of what your cause is, and how it's going to impact the community, and then find partners who can open doors for you.
Hmm. That's definitely something that I heard as you were working through that, right? Is, hey, if you got a relationship with Oprah or Michael Jordan, great. But if you don't, who do you have a relationship with? And I would imagine that a lot of the work that you do, Tim, really comes down to relationships. In order to inspire people, you have to have relationships. You've got to invest in people.
Yeah. My dad said you don't ask for money the first time you meet somebody. That's the equivalent of propositioning a woman on the first date. He said, just don't do that, because they don't know you and you don't know them. You don't you may go and say, I want to ask them for this, and that's not their passion. That they know there's some donors who literally do not want to give to building projects. They want to, because they don't see it directly touching. They want to give to impact people's lives directly. And until you understand, my dad used to say, you listen your way to the gift, Tim. Engage them in conversation. What fires them up? What motivates them? What are the priorities that their family shares philanthropically? And then you try and figure out, do I have something that my ministry is doing that will inspire and engage this family along the lines of what they care about and what they support?
Hmm. I love that. I was actually just sharing with someone last week. I said There's a difference between manipulation and persuasion. Manipulation is trying to get somebody to do something that you want them to do. There's no real benefit for them, right? But persuasion is finding the intersection of something that you really need and that they want to be a part of. And if we can lean into persuasion instead of trying to manipulate people to do things, I think that the ickiness that sometimes is associated with fundraising goes away, because then we are helping people to actually reach their goals, right? That these people want to be a part of something, and you're just connecting your cause to what they want to be a part of. So much, so much.
If you recall, it was like 15 years ago, there was that huge tidal wave in Indonesia that killed so many people, and the whole world rushed to help them and bring aid to them. And it just tells me that God has planted in our hearts uh, a desire to love our brothers and sisters and to come to their aid and to help them. And sometimes our world can put obstacles in the way of that desire, that ambition. But that is in our hearts. That is in all of our hearts. And we as leaders just have to help inspire that generous impulse that already exists in people and direct it to an appropriate cause.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. That is perfect. That is perfect. Tim, when all is said and done, I want to talk about your personal legacy a little bit. You have certainly been on a journey with God that has had its ups and its downs. But you've certainly been a blessing to so many people, many of which, as you've shared, you will never know that you've been able to touch them. But when all is said and done for you, Tim, what do you hope to be remembered for?
That I was a man of faith, that I wasn't ashamed to admit my faith, uh, that I was a good husband, a loving husband who helped inspire my wife, who inspires me, and that I made a difference, that I made a difference in the communities that I've been privileged to serve. Um, it's it's a really we used to call it the psychic paycheck in CCS, when you'd go back to a place where you'd run a fundraising campaign and you'd see a church that you helped build, or a school that you helped build a new wing for, or you'd watched students graduate who had received scholarships to go to high school from a program that you helped raise the money for. And in the Jewish tradition, the highest act of charity is the gift that the recipient has no idea who gave it and can never give it back. That's the highest act of charity, and that's what I take a lot of gratitude that God has put me in a place to do a lot of things to help people, and they don't need to know who I am, and they just need to pay it forward, not pay it back. So
Amen. Tim, thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you have shared with us today. We wish you God's best as you move forward in your work at the church and all the causes that you are supporting.
thank you so much. It's been a real honor and a pleasure to be part of your broadcast and to meet you, Tam. Thank you so very much.